Thanks for having me here tonight. I want to talk about curious business, and I want to talk to you about an intersection of what I would say is an overlap of relational trade, business, and sustainability. Sustainability is a term I'm going to use a few times, so let's talk about that for a second. I think sustainability as a topic, it begs us to see the big picture rather than just a few parts. As a concept, we need to think deeper when we go into sustainability. And I'd say too often sustainability is converted into what I would call simplistic sound bites. The dream of everybody is simplistic sustainability, how to wrap our heads around something so big and complex that we can navigate it manageably. Simplistic thinking has us look for a formula rather than look for ways that might be a little slower and more difficult. And this type of simplicity may bode well for marketers, but generally for humanity and the planet as a whole, it doesn't work so well. The typical direction of our attention on the topic of sustainability is usually the environment. We get into conversations about how we have to change our environmental behavior, and as a result, sustainability will come about. But my premise is that the best forward momentum in the topic of sustainability is primarily dependent on the health of and improvement of human relationships. So while a common notion for sustainability advocates is hug a tree, I would suggest that the real focus needs to be hug a farmer. What does that look like in terms of moving forward? Well, most people would agree if you want a stable stool, it's going to need 3 legs. And in the same way, ethical consumption has 3 legs it needs to stand on to be robust and solid. First of all, we need to look at, for instance, the impact on the environment. So a few thoughts on that, impact on environment. Well, we can go out and purchase a product that might be in name organic, but if we don't scratch into the surface, we may not find out that it's not a very sustainably minded product. Here we are in BC, middle of winter, and we choose to have a glass of organic orange juice for breakfast on a weekend morning. We all kind of know where that's going to go, right? How did that orange juice get to us? How did the tractor perform without diesel operating in the orchard in Florida where it was grown? And it takes 1,000 liters of water to get 1 liter of orange juice. So it might be a name organic, but sustainable, I think it'd be a stretch. Take the topic of local. We've got a lot of local markets growing up around us, and in the summertime, in the growing season, we see lots of local produce. I've got a neighbor who makes a living growing veggies and selling them in the local market. And I've talked to him at length about how he markets his product and what types of conversations go on, and his concern is continually the lack of relationship in trade. Now, I've seen some of his own workers down on the ground for a whole day, weeding tiny little weeds out of tiny little carrots in a 200-foot-long row. And it costs him for a 200-foot-long row of carrots to be weeded $200 of labor. But in the same market on the same day, there will be another farmer doing business in the same area of the country who will also market his carrots as local, and that farmer will have ridded the 200-foot row of weeds with $25 of herbicide in a backpack sprayer. And the person going shopping for local carrots isn't asking the question of what was used on the soil, they're just saying, is it local? And they're missing the point. So also when it comes to the topic of impact on people, most people will jump out and say, fair trade, that'll save the day. And my suggestion again is, let's scratch the surface, get a little deeper. When fair trade as a concept kicked off, it wasn't actually called fair trade, it was called alternative trade. Because the idea behind alternative trade, it was going to be an alternative to how businesses that were typically regarded as mainstream, for-profit, they were lacking something. And usually the lack was ethics and fairness, so there was a need for something alternative. Now, that got kicked off by 10,000 villages about 65 years ago with handicrafts made by artisans in developing countries. The food side of consumables that are marketed as fair trade didn't get rolling till about the 80s or the 90s. And again, it was a response of alternative, traded-minded businesses moving against the mainstream, the profit-focused businesses that were seen as not being fair. But as that term of trade started to go mainstream, we started to see that the multinationals, who were the cause for fair trade starting in the first place, became the biggest players in fair trade. And so the question starts to be asked, if most multinationals offer it, what's so alternative about fair trade? I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about when people are left with a really simplistic approach to navigating the complexity of global trade and sustainability. Lots of different chocolate bars. And if you look around on each of them, there's in fact one logo that everyone would be needing to look for and find if they're to determine whether or not in the current marketplace it's fair or not. The challenge is some of those fair trade chocolate bars are coming out of worker-owned co-ops who do all the value added, produce all the product, and are truly putting together the essence of a fair trade item for the marketplace. The flip side to that is that some of the businesses represented there represent the very reason why alternative trade started. They'd be seen as the bad ones on the planet. Most of their products aren't regarded or marketed as fair trade, but some are because they're driving for a niche and they want to make profit in every sector. So, in the words of the Incredibles, when everyone's super, nobody's super. What are we left with as a response as consumers or business owners? I think the first thing to realize is that fair trade was never meant to be a product. That's a pretty novel concept in today's market. Fair trade was never meant to be a product. It was meant to be a whole entire way of doing business. The whole philosophical ethos of an organization was to be about fair trade. If you ask anyone who's involved in fair trade as a movement globally, they'll always come down to three main tenets that are used in every definition of fair trade. It's about dialogue, transparency, and respect. All the hallmarks of any healthy relationship. You remove any one of them, and it's not fair in the original context of what fair trade was meant to be. And we're, at the same time, busy, well-meaning people. We're out there in a busy, complex marketplace. We want to do good, and we realize at the same time that we're facing global challenges. And so we look for a list or a logo to help navigate the complexity of it all. And I think the way that it starts to emerge as a better way to do business and move forward and think about sustainability is to recognize that life and business and products is rarely good or bad. Things ride on a continuum. So we need to be able to embrace complexity, surf the continuum, and recognize degrees of separation. Now, in the marketplace with fair trade products, that's brutally difficult to navigate. But there's other markets that I think are very thoughtful and thought-provoking that are good examples of this. If you've got an investment advisor and you go to him or her and say, I want to invest in ethical funds, they will show you a host of different products with multiple screens or filters put across those products, and they will show a continuum from most ethical to least ethical, all within the ethical fund family. It makes total sense to your advisor. It'll make total sense to you that you can see how one screen is different from another. So how do we help people to embrace the continuum in all these other areas as well, like consuming day-to-day products? What I'm suggesting is we need to continually be looking to shift towards sustainable, built on relational. And what does that look like? Well, I'd say every person who's a player in the market has a huge possible ability to have their approach hiccuped in a very positive sort of way. Think of a person wanting to be a better buyer. If they start asking questions and being promoted towards curiousness rather than just look for a formulaic, it's there, it's not there, it's good, it's bad. They'll start to engage what's going on around them and ask totally different questions. Think about the young job shopper. Someone who's out there wanting to lend their expertise, their passion, their enthusiasm. Possibilities are high that if they're a really great prize for an organization to hire, they could be picked up by a company that's largely profit-driven and perhaps weak on the ethical side of things. But what if they had a values alignment with a business that has a similar values alignment and their why for being lines up? That person gets involved and their value gets into the workplace. And when people's values get into the workplace, businesses change for the good. In the end, this has huge effect on producers whose poverty is being preyed upon by the global economy. So I'm suggesting continually relationships are going to be what change the tides for sustainability. Recognizing, yes, relationships are complex. They can't be turned into formula. They can't be certified. You can't slap a logo on them. They require us to interact, to think broadly, and most of all to care. When markets aren't relational and they're not focused on sustainability, we move into paternalistic markets, where those with the money, those with the appetites, dictate what others will do and how they should perform in the marketplace. Take an example of a steep, very susceptible to erosion hillside growing monocrop coffee in Colombia, South America. A farmer comes into a time where the wave is ridden in terms of prices in the marketplace going up and down. And it's a speculative economy where commodities are bought in the millions and billions of dollars annually. A farmer sees perhaps years in a row where the price steadily drops and in a forward motion thinks, this isn't a good direction. I'm going to have to clear this hillside and turn it to something more profitable. And this, in Colombia, typically turns into beef. So a cattle ranch emerges where there used to be coffee. And there at least used to be some roots from the coffee trees preventing erosion of that hillside. Turn it all to pasture, the family moves away from the family farm, they set up shop in an urban area and hope to find jobs. they go back and visit their ranch once in a while. And when the rains hit, as they have again in the past year, everything washes away. We tell people to be organic in their small-scale farm while not understanding that they can't afford access to health care or education in their own community. And when we tell them to go organic, what they may just hear is, you want my yields on my farm to decrease by 20% this year? That's what organic farming will do to me. At the same time, our paternalism is very two-faced. The farmers driving tractors around our own communities are spreading chemicals, and we're not asking them to stop. And we'll go outside in spring, maybe in the next month or so, and just throw a few chemicals on our lawns so the grass greens up. But we're wanting a person who can't afford education for their children to go organic. And so the message becomes very confusing and inconsistent. So Michael Pollan, a guy who I appreciate reading from his book In Defense of Food, suggests you need to break out of the supermarket rule. You need to shake the hand that feeds you. And as soon as you do, accountability becomes once more a matter of relationships instead of regulation or labeling or legal liability. So my suggestion and my experience going forward for those interested in consumption with better habits, business with better behaviors, is that businesses need to partner with marginalized small-scale producers. The producers that are able to produce quality and as a result get paid better for it because the quality is there. And when fair price for quality product in the context of a relationship becomes normal, which would be amazing, there's a pathway forward for sustainability. The little guy can predict what's expected of him or her. There can be a partnership that works for both. Now, our business is called Level Ground Trading. We've been at it here in Victoria for 15 years, since 1997. We've always had the same mission. It's to trade fair and direct, to do it with small-scale producers in developing countries. We started out with producer partnerships just in Colombia, where my business partner grew up, and we've grown from there with more families and more communities with more products. And this year, in our 15th year of business, from 8 different producer groups, 8 different countries, we'll source the harvest of about 5,000 small-scale farming families. In each community which we visit regularly, we see consistent movement towards sustainable behavior in the environment, in the community as a whole, how people interact with one another. It's healthier. And the key in all of it is we're never telling people what they should do. We're listening to hear what it is they want to do and help them achieve that goal through a relationship based on what I mentioned: dialogue, transparency, and respect. At the core, when people reach for a product that they believe to be fair trade, the heart, concern, and desire they have is that the little person, that small-scale marginalized producer, is going to do better financially. And that is a key, one of the 10 tenets of fair trade, that fair prices are paid. So how do you monitor that? And the challenge is that in many organizations and structures for fair trade, there's actually not even the question being asked, how much got back to the little guy? We document this on our website for every shipment we bring into our facility, and we're able to track how much we paid and how much actually made it to the farmer members of the producer groups or the co-ops who we bought from. So with that, plus letters of intent, we communicate more than a year in advance to farming communities how much we hope to buy. We negotiate with them how much we'll pay based on certain quality standards. So imagine you're a farmer who typically feels very much taken advantage of and riding a very unpredictable wave in the world economy. And you're pruning the plants now for a harvest a year from now, and you already know how much this one buyer is intending to purchase, what quality expectations they have, and what they'll pay for it. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of it and presents a whole pile of possibilities. Rather than being paternalistic and telling them what to do, we've agreed with them how they will move forward based on what they want to accomplish. And they make the best choices for themselves. So a summary thought is that moving towards sustainable, well, if it's going to be personal, I think it needs to start with food. We put it in our body, and we recognize it as a personal choice. We make it relational by shortening the chain, and in the process, we find one way or another that it comes down to hugging a farmer. Thanks.